In this episode of Building the Metaverse, I talk about dynamic lighting in Spoke and baked lighting using the Naxela Lightmapper in Blender. This episode, as with the rest of them, is sponsored by Utopia VR, a super cool metaverse platform powered by Mozilla Hubs, where you can have your own private virtual space. You can check them out at utopiavr.com. And now let's learn about lighting. Spoke has got some really cool scenes and some pretty cool capabilities for you to be able to use dynamic lights. So the difference between dynamic lighting and baked lighting is dynamic lighting, even though it sounds cooler, doesn't look as nice, but it is in real time. So if I get rid of all the lights in this room, then everything is pure black, right? And I'll get rid of this wireframe. So this is actually a really great place to start in terms of what your lighting looks like. And I'll use the shadows viewport mode. And if I add in a directional light here, I just move it up, then that is shining like a sun parallel light in the direction that it faces. So if I move this down, you can see I've got light coming from that direction now. And if I add in, let's say a little a wall or something, yeah, a wall with a window in it, and you can see that that shadow is being cast um, into this environment, which is really nice because this does happen in real time. So if we were to actually animate this, we can see, where the shadow ends up. We can change stuff like the shadow map resolution to be higher or lower, so you get even higher fidelity shadow quality, which you can see the shadow resolution there. And if I lower this down to 256, you can see it's quite much more blobby. Um, I think by default it's 512. You can go up from there. The larger the shadow map resolution, the more time it will take, the more processor intensive it will be. Um, and it should be stated that Mozilla Hubs, by default, the mobile devices do not have lights and dynamic lights and shadows enabled. So this works great on desktop, but on mobile devices and I think most VR headsets, the shadows aren't going to come in by default. So that's kind of our first, like our main key light here. And if we wanted to make these shadows not so dark, we definitely want to have a fill light. And if you're not super familiar with 3-point lighting, it's key light, rim light, and fill light they make up the 3 points. And there's a billion videos online about how to use them and what they're like. So I won't dive super deep into that now. But there's a few different dynamic lights that are all, um, like I was saying, they're rendered in real time. And what's nice about these is that you can really you can get those dynamic shadows that are happening in real time. You can see if I stack these, I get these two different shadows from the two different light sources. That's really cool. And I've seen people bring in flashlights and they can actually illuminate the scene and actually shine light, as they move the flashlight around. So there's a lot of fun to be had with that type of thing. The downside is that they are quite limited in what their shadow map resolution can be, and there's no area lights. So you have spotlights, point lights, and directional lights. So these are cool, but you don't have any rectangle lights, or what's known more commonly as area lights. 3JS calls them rectangle lights, which is just lights that come from a source larger than an infinitely small point. So like a point light comes from an infinitely small point, and that spot is basically where the light source is. And a spotlight is that same thing, but with a cone attached to it, so it's only shining in one direction. But it's basically the same thing. A directional light comes from infinite directions, all the way to the left, all the way to the right, and that's why you get, and all the way up, all the way down, and that's why you get these parallel shadows. This simulates natural light, or at least sunlight, because Earth is so far away from the sun, and the sun is so big that by the time the light gets here, the difference between the North Pole and the South Pole is a very, very, very small angle. So the difference between the top of your window and the bottom of your window is going to be almost zero, almost incalculable, not able to be figured out. Um, so it's helpful for simulating sunlight, but it is basically the only thing. Sunlight and moonlight is basically the only thing that a directional light will look realistic on. Everything else, it looks a little bit meh. Back in the day before they had bounce lighting, you would basically take a whole bunch of directional lights and you would duplicate them and you would shine them in opposite directions with different intensities to act as fill lights. So if you wanted, one orange sunny day, you could make this like, a bit more orange. And then if you wanted to have your fill light on the other side of that be a cool shadow color, then you'd have this one be a little bit more blue. And this is how you kind of get these cooler shadows here and a little bit more warmer colors from the other side. And of course, all this stuff can be pushed. So you get like a really nice cool shadow. And the balance between these two lights and their color intensity is kind of like the old school way of painting CG scenes. This is what Toy Story 1 did, basically. It's a whole bunch of directional lights that are just painting the different angles of the environment. Now, like, and you can see this little spawner dude is like, he's like now cool looking. He's got like cool shadows and warm key lights, and that's fun. Um, Unfortunately, the more lights that you have in the scene, the more difficult the scene is going to be to load in on mobile devices. I think if you try to publish this, like after having four, I think four lights is like a medium amount. Having two or three is like a low amount, and then four or five is a medium amount, and then like six and up is like kind of like, okay, you have too many lights in the scene. Um, and they don't particularly look very realistic when you compare it to something like these. These are the area lights where they're like rectangular lights, as they're known in 3JS, which Hubs currently doesn't yet support. It would be so cool if they did though. And these look a lot more realistic because they come from an area, which like a length times a width, and that gives them a more natural fall off, and that just gives them a lot more realism because nothing in our world comes from an infinitely small point, and most of our lights have diffusion on them, through either windows or bounce lights or what lamp covers, whatever it may be. Um, even the glass inside of the flashlight is diffusing and refracting the light in a different way than just a point light would be. And so Mozilla Hubs does not yet support these types of lights, though it would be really neat if they did. So if you want to have that type of light, or if you want to have more realistic lighting, then you shouldn't use dynamic lighting. You should use baked lighting. Baked lighting takes all of this lighting that we're doing here, or more accurately, that we would be doing in Blender. And let me just reopen the scene here a little bit. Go back to here. Yeah. So if we have this scene, did I already bake on this? No, I didn't. Okay. I just made this scene really quickly this morning, and it's just a directional light um, shining into a brick building with a window on it onto a plant. And it also has an area light in it, on the window. And I'll show you what those two things are doing just by moving this camera in here. And you can see I've got my directional light. That's my sun, right? And I have my area light here, which is just shining in a soft light from the window. So if I hide the sunlight and you look at what the area light is doing, it's just this really soft. And I can turn up the intensity a little bit so we can see it a little bit better. There's some really soft lighting coming in from that window. And I really like using area lights or even portal lights combined with directional lights because it simulates bounce really well. But you can see that this is coming in from that window and it's just super duper soft on the ground. The shadows are really nice, really soft. It looks like a very overcast day. Let me see if I can make this. Oh, I always do this. I suck at changing the size of these things. Let's see. Like this, and then like this. Just put the camera in a nice spot here so you can see as much of the room as possible. There we go. So that's the result of my area light, and I like it. It would be perfect if this had drapes on it or something like that. Even the lighting on in my room right now is coming from a window to my right, and there's no direct sunlight in here. It's not this. I can't see the sun. The sun's actually on the other side of the building, but because the sun is hitting the atmosphere and all the trees outside and bouncing around so many trillions of times every single photon, that enough light is bouncing into this room. The auto exposure of the webcam is brightening it up to the point where you can see it's just starting to clip on the forehead. It's just getting to that higher level of brightness, and it seems quite direct. But if you look at the wall behind me, it's super soft. It's a very soft light coming in from the window, and you know it's it's pretty soft. I mean, like it's not very crisp on the windowsill either. You can see the shadow of the window latch there. You can make out the latch, but it's pretty soft for considering how close the latch is to the wall. And you can see outside, those are the trees that are illuminating kind of that bounce light into this room and giving that appearance. So shadow softness and shadow hardness is like a real indicator of what your light is doing and how your light is bouncing around the world. Um, so if I pop back to my blender here, you can see that this is super duper soft and it's giving that look. So this might be, a daytime with a little bit of overcast with the sun on the opposite side of the building, or maybe just above or shining directly on something outside of this window that is bouncing off of that thing and into the room. And that's all good but if I want to just hide this and then turn on my sunlight, there's my direct sunlight. And you can see that it bounces, and I've even turned up the bounces in here, trying to get more than the default. My light paths under my render tab here, render properties, light paths, max bounces. I've turned up my diffuse bounces to try to get more bounces. And you can see that direct light does bounce around. It does have this color bleed onto this wall here, but it is too contrasty, like we were talking about earlier, trying to find that natural balance of having enough contrast but not too much contrast, and enough contrast that it doesn't appear flat. And so this kind of feels like it's too much contrast. If this was a daytime and the light really was shining in there, I would expect a lot more bounce light to come from this. But asking that single sunlight to bounce around that many times in this room, it's going to take a tremendous amount of samples. It's going to take a tremendous amount of bounces, and it might just be easier to fake the bounce light by adding in that area light. And so now when we have these two together, this area light's a bit bright because I cranked it from before. But honestly, it's not too bad. It just seems like like a very a sunny day. It seems like it's um doesn't quite make perfect sense at this angle because the steeper the sun is, and you can do this with a physical sky, right? But the steeper the sunlight angle is, the more close it is to sunset or sunrise when it starts to get more red and it starts to get into these deeper colors. I imagine if it were to be this color and this brightness, This feels like maybe a 10 a.m. in California in the summer, and you'd want to match that angle as well. A lot of things are adding to the realism, to the possibility of what this environment would look like. But at a basic level, this isn't so bad. Like it looks nice enough. It's got it could be on a skyscraper, for example. This could be the 138th floor, and that's why it's coming in at more of a lower angle. Um, but yeah, so here we have a kind of a really it's not really nice, but it's a basic lighting demonstration of what's possible with ray trace lighting. And in order to bake this down into texture, we can bake it down into texture and then assign it to, and upload it to our spoke scene. So we get all that really nice lighting, but we get it only for the cost of texture space. We don't have to re-render it every single frame. Because if I just show you like in here, let me see if I grab, there's a rock in here. I'll grab a rock. Let me pause my render. Grab a rock here, and if I move this rock in front of the wind, oh, the rock is huge. Whoa, that's sick. Okay, scale this way down. Scale it up a little bit. Uh-oh, I scaled it infinitely small. And I move this in front of the window. What's awesome about this is you can see the real time light is happening. So that is what you get out of dynamic lights that you won't get out of baked lights, but this is what you get out of baked lights that you won't get out of dynamic lights. So dynamic lights don't look as pretty. They take longer to render, but they give you real-time shadows. So nice, right? And then baked lights, they can look as pretty as your lighting capabilities can make them. I mean, and you can do some nice stuff with dynamic lights in here too. You can get clever with directional lights, but you really can only use like 3 or 4 before you start taxing the system too much. Um, so there's a lot of limitations, and if you're really good with lighting, then and being creative, then those limitations you should be able to use well to make some really nice art pieces. But baked lighting has just so much more freedom and potential. Um, so this baked lighting looks, way nicer. But the problem is that if I pick up a rock and move it in front of this window, no shadow will appear on the ground here. So that's the trade-off. I tend to lean towards baked lighting because it's just nicer, and I think I coming from the 3D animation world, I think it's I really like it. I really like getting to that higher quality, like film-like quality inside of the browser. That's like really fun stuff. And this is the scene that I light baked. And the thing to remember about lighting, and we talked about this a little bit last week, is lighting is pure emotion. So when lighting this scene, the entire pivot points of what this lighting should look like was right here. I wanted this frame, this rectangle to be like, wow, that's bright and beautiful, and like it draws you in. You want to come inside, look at the shiny table. You want to go over to the window and look at how bright and beautiful it is. Like you want this plant to be practically glowing. I wish Hubs supported bloom. It doesn't yet, though it does look like some people have developed bloom on their own Hubs Cloud instances. But this openness, this like emotional openness, cleanliness is what I wanted for this professional environment. Now, this same exact environment with dark red lighting or I mean, you can see how much it would change the mood if we had stars out here and a nice moonlight coming in and some salt rock candle table, like salt rock lights on the table that were just emitting a nice soft orange glow. And you had more of a twinkle lights going on, like a cafe in Italy at dusk. Like you can see how that would completely change without changing the models, without changing the textures. That would completely change the vibe. So the most important thing you want to do with lighting is ask yourself exactly what do I want the audience to feel? What is it that I want them to experience internally when they experience my space or my art piece? So it's like, am I trying to make them feel open or vulnerable or excited or dangerous, or like what emotional palette am I going to draw upon? And then seek out the experiences that have made you feel that way, and try to think about what the lighting and vibe was like there, what the colors were like there. These virtual spaces are so interesting because the environment, lighting and design, models, textures, all that stuff, has such a profound impact on the type of conversations we have in the space. It's incredible. For as an example, like I have office meetings in here all the time. They're quite professional. We talk about business. We talk about accounting. But it's not fun. We also are very casual in this space. Probably just because that's the culture I bring to it. But in another environment, in a snowy cabin Santa's workshop environment where there was like a fireplace and these Chesterfield couches, and it was like super cozy, and there were blankets on the couches and all that stuff. The same group of people were talking about family and talking about how they grew up and their traditions and all that stuff, because that environment promotes those types of conversations. It incites them out of us. So just like if you're at an amusement park, it's going to be a different conversation than if you're in your childhood living room, and it's going to be a different conversation than if you're in like a bamboo office in the mountains. So these types of contributions make a huge impact on how the space will be used. So lighting is critical. Lighting is like it is one of the largest impacts on mood and vibe. I think it was the largest until scale. Now scale I think is how people experience their own scale in the space is even larger in terms of how much it impacts the mood. But yeah, lighting is basically mood. So if you want to create lighting of a certain type, I don't think you actually are thinking about lighting of a certain type. You're actually thinking about a feeling. So think about that feeling. Think about that feeling, how that feeling looks like to you, and then try to see if you can create that with colored pixels using these lighting tools, or the dynamic ones if you're really awesome. Um, but that's kind of like the concept behind why lighting is so important and how much it influences. Having said all of that, you may be wondering at this point, okay, so I've lit this scene and that looks all good and well, but how do I actually get that lit scene into Spoke or into Hubs? And I use the Naxela Lightmapper plugin. It's super cool. It is super powerful. It has zero documentation online. So there's the only way to figure it out is just to keep spamming and clicking buttons until you figure it out, which thankfully, I've already done that good work, and I'll be able to just explain it to you. Each object in this scene, you can enable light mapping or not, right? And I actually, in order to have light mapping, you need to have two UV sets. The light mapper will actually make one for you, but I've never used that. I doubt that it's very good. Maybe it's awesome, and I'm just not giving it credit. But I'm just I'm light mapping each one of these objects myself. So if I start well, no, that's okay. I'll just show you what I've done. Any questions on any of those topics or anything so far? Okay, carrying forward. So I have this unwrapped right here, and you can see that it's larger than the 0 to 1 space because I have a tileable brick texture on it, right? So if I scale these UVs up, then the brick texture gets smaller and denser, and if I scale them down, then it gets larger until it looks kind of unrealistic. But if these textures, if these unwraps are working, like they're not distorted, like it doesn't look something like this where it's like all broken and distorted and yucky. If these are uniform and working, and I would even probably go so far as to tile these. Of course the bricks wouldn't wrap around, but you'd have to fix, these seams if you wanted to be like even more diligent about this. um the interaction of bricks on the walls there. Bricks don't turn, right? But so it's okay to have a seam in the corner. um but yeah, I would probably find a clever way to resolve that. Um, but once I have this working, it's working as a tileable texture, and there's very little UV distortion, and the texel density is quite uniform across the entire piece. Not one of these pieces is like way bigger than the rest. The texel density is quite uniform. Once I have these clean unwraps, which all I did for an object so simple as this is just select them all and hit UV, Smart UV Project, and then hit OK, and then rotated them 90 degrees, oops, 90 degrees, and then scaled them up. So super quick and dirty job, but it's a very simple model, so it's not the end of the world. Um, Once I have that, I can duplicate this UV set onto a second UV set by going down here to this Object Data Properties window, right? And if I have this UV map, and if I hit plus sign, it will create a UV map 001, which is actually a duplicate of the first one. So that's the starting point. That's great. This one we can now call light map, and then I can scale that so it's fitting inside of the 0 to 1 space. Right? And I actually, on this one, I may even just re-unwrap this with a Smart UV project. Some people, sorry, I bumped the microphone there. Some people will use the light map pack. I I do not like using the light map pack. It is definitely the most efficient, but it's also the ugliest. And if I were to just show you what the map is doing to this texture, you can see like this is not pretty. It's very efficient, but it does whatever it can to take up the most space that it can, and so you will get really weird problems in these stretch areas in terms of like pixel distortion and pixel stretching. Even you'd have to have such a high resolution bake for you to not see that stuff. So I never use it. I never use the light map pack. I just use the Smart UV project, or I set my own seams and use the unwrap. But most of the time, the Smart UV project works, and I give it a little bit of an island. So it's like 0.04. And that gives it a little bit of space between these. You want a little bit of space between these. If you don't have a little bit of space between these, then what you get are these MIP mapping errors that as your camera, like as your Hubs camera gets further and further from the scene, you start to see all of the seams as they blend the light map together, because the texture is getting smaller and smaller in terms of the pixel data that it's taking up on the screen space. And at some point you're going to get this pixel over here that's going to shine onto this pixel over here, right? And so then you'll start to see these gray lines that appear around all of your seams and all of your corners, and all it just looks really bad. So the more space that you have between these, the less likely you are to run into that problem, because they'll bleed. But also the less resolution that you have for your light map. So it's not like you should set this to something like, if you set this to 5, oops, or like 0.5 and hit OK, well, then this is too much because you're actually now wasting a lot of texture space that you could be using on your light map. So you know, there's a there's a few general rule of thumbs about what percentage it should be. Pellinor in the Hubs Discord is the man for this type of stuff. if you need more like help on that kind of thing, you can definitely ask him. I do it by eye. Um, I would say probably like 0.03. It also depends, on the size of your texture, but maybe a little bit more than that would be okay. Maybe like 0.08. Ooh, that's a little bit more than I need, I think. So maybe 0.06. See what that looks like. That's nice. That's nice because I'm not wasting too much, but I don't think I'll have an issue with mip mapping. It's probably a little bit more conservative than it needs to be, but that's okay. And I'll get rid of this. Now I have a UV set for this brick wall. One of them is the UV map running the tileable texture, and the other one is the light map, which I'm going to bake onto. And I've done that for each and every one of these. On the floor here, I have a UV map, which is scaled up to tile that texture quite thoroughly, and then the light map, which is actually just fitting inside of the 0 to 1 space as efficiently as possible. Same with the ceiling, which is a tweed ceiling. It shouldn't be a tweed ceiling, but it is one. Um, I guess the UV map could be scaled up more if I wanted the tweed ceiling. Don't know why there would be carpet on the roof, but there's carpet on this roof. And going to this light map here, and you can see it's fitting into the 0 to 1. And of course, the plant. The plant that's got the Atlas textures that we talked about last week. And if you look at these UVs, you can see that UV map is there. And let's see, we can't see the color atlas. There we go. You can see that this is how the color map UVs are working. And the light map looks like this. There's no overlapping, right? They're all at this is actually not that good. They're a little bit too close there. Not ideal. This might have been a light map pack. I don't even remember how I unwrapped this. Definitely should have a little bit more space there. That might produce some problems. Um, but let's just see what happens because this is complicated an object enough that even if you saw those problems, I don't even know if you'd notice them. So I now have a UV set for each one. I have a UV map and a light map for each one. The light map will always be the second UV map set. It will never be the first. It's just the way Three.js is set up that the second UV map will always be what's used for the light mapping. So now using the Naxela Lightmapper, there's a lot of tutorials online on how to bake light maps to Blender. So if you want to do it the manual way, the old school way, that's totally cool. But if you're using the Naxela Lightmapper plugin, which is a free plugin and super powerful, but like I said, just doesn't have any documentation, all you have to do is select each object that you want to have the bake apply to, and you go over here to your object properties, and then under the light mapper tab, you just hit enable light mapping. And by default, it'll say, enable light mapping, use default UV channel, and it will actually unwrap your object for you. I don't do this because you can see I've already set up my light map. So I'm going to uncheck that, and I'm going to specify my UV channel is the second one here, the light map, and I can set the resolution for the texture. So I'll just keep everything nice and light for now, nice and small. And I can do that for each and every one of these. Now, I already have. This is like the part of the cooking recipe where the cake comes out of the oven already baked. Because I've already set this up on each one of these things. But I have enabled light mapping for the floor, for the walls, for the plant, and for the ceiling. And they're all at different resolutions. I don't need a whole huge texture for the ceiling. That's at 256. The walls are a 1K. The floor is a 512. The plant is a 512. 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's it. That's the only thing that I have. Then if I pop over to my render view here, my render properties, closing these down, there is the light mapper menu section. And if I just open this up, I'm going to specify, yes, I want it to render in cycles. Of course, that's the only thing that can bake. And in here, there's a whole bunch of settings. This build light map button will start the bake. Okay, clean light maps will actually erase the files. And explore light maps will actually open up the file explorer with the files that you bake. Now, I've already baked these, so I already have them in here. But if I hit clean light maps, it will actually delete them. And just did that. And then if I open up the browser again, they should be, if I hit refresh. Uh-oh, my Windows is crashing. Yep, the folder is empty. So there's no more light maps in there. Okay. Not that it matters, they will just overwrite, but just so you have these controls. Now the quality is really low. It's the lowest on this list, right? The custom will use your aliasing and sampling settings here, not your aliasing, but your sampling settings up here. Um, and I'll just leave this at the lowest version for now. And the resolution scale is super cool. So when we applied each one of those resolutions in our object properties, light map resolutions for each object, we set that to 124, 1024, and we set this to 512 or whatever. In here, we're actually going to say an eighth of that size. So it gives us a quick way for us to bake out all of the light maps at a very, very, very small resolution just to see what they look like, to see if that's going to work for us. And at a really low quality, it shouldn't take any time at all to bake all 4 maps. And they automatically bake in HDR format and they automatically save the file. So this is just a bunch of stuff that the manual baking in Blender does not do by default. You always have to select the node that you want it to bake it to. It only saves it in memory unless you actually save it. And you have to save it in HDR format. So there's a bunch of clicking and a bunch of nonsense that it's like this app just gets rid of it. There are some pretty cool denoising options and all kinds of stuff that are totally worth exploring. But for the basics, like this is pretty sweet. Um, you can also hit select light map objects. So every single object that you've checked that enable light mapping turned on, it will select them. This is a really good way to check to see if you are if you're baking all the objects. That's pretty cool. It's working. Say I say, oh, you know what? The plant is perfect. I don't need to rebake that. I can select this plant and then hit well, I can take it off, enable light mapping there. And then if I select the set again, it shouldn't, let me just deselect everything and hit select light map up. Yep, it didn't select the plant. Now I've selected that whole set. I could just disable for the whole set. And now if you go through each object property in here, all of them are turned off, right? And I can select all of them, 2, 3, 4. Is that all of them? Yep. And I could go back to my Naxela Lightmapper in here, and I can hit enable for set. But I think that's enabling it with these settings. So if I go back to my object properties here, yeah, it did. It enabled it with the settings that I've specified that are specified here for all of them. So that means 256 and smart project on wrap mode and all that stuff. So I'd like to have the individual control here, and so I'm going to make sure that all this stuff is set up kind of the way I had it before. So the brick gets a 1K texture. The floor, well, let me select the floor. Oh, the floor's normals might be going the wrong way. Yeah, the floor's normals are backwards. So I'm just going to flip these mesh, normals flip. There we go. And I'm going to set this to 1024. Set this plant to 512. They are on the light map. I'm happy about that. The wall's already done, and the ceiling. Uh-oh, ceilings normals are flipped too. Mesh normals flip. There we go. Cool. And set that to 256. I don't need a very big light map on there. And go over here and select my light maps. And yep, all of them are there. All of them are, they are all enabled. And now all I have to do is hit bake or hit build light maps. Now I'll save this first because I'm streaming, I'm recording, and so there's a good chance that something's going to go wrong here. But there we go. That's my light map built. It's 1/8 the size of what I specified it should be. And if I look at this little preview here, you can see, yeah, that's my light map baked to a texture. It's freaking working across all the objects. And then I may say, oh, you know what? I just got a note from my director and they said that they want the light to be over here now. Oops. They want it to be facing the other way. And it's like, oh man, I got to rebake all my lights. That's going to take forever. Well, not really. I just rebuild it. And now it's over there. And they go, oh, we missed the plant. We've got to have the plant in there. It's got to be, so maybe we'll change that to here, and maybe the area light could be brighter, or maybe the area light should be like blue, a little bit more blue. And we can test what all this looks like by using cycles to see what it will bake as. Right now, it's going to show me both the light bake texture and the light map, so it's not really the best way to test things because you can see that it's actually baked into the shader. But the Naxela Lightmap, actually, the light mapper is pretty cool because it adds in this UV map node, the light map file, and then it just creates a little multiply node here to multiply that onto the others so you can see what it looks like. And in order to get this ready for hubs, all you have to do is create a light map here, disconnect that there, and just plug that one into here. And now all of a sudden you're ready to export for hubs. Like it's that light map is going to work. Um, so if I undo all that, you can clean all this up. If you haven't changed anything, you can clean all this up by just hitting, let's see, in here. Oh, sorry, in here. I go clean light maps and it gets rid of all of that stuff. And I think yeah, let's see. I don't know if it actually, sometimes this doesn't work. I think if you're not perfect about like having all of your nodes be exactly the same, then it will create some problems and it will give you some errors that most of the time just resetting Blender will fix. But now I'm clean of all my light maps and I can look in through cycles and I can recalibrate. Yeah, that blue light looks a lot nicer now, that area light with a cooler color because it looks a little bit more like sky. It's a little bit intense right now. Probably don't need that much saturation on it. Just back that down. Little bit of coolness is nice though. And this directional light here, we can give this a little bit more warmth for funsies. Put this over here somewhere. And it's always nice to have a nice color temperature balance. I think that that's probably a bit too saturated. Saturation is a lot like salt. It's very important for the meal, but it's super easy to overdo it. So you want to keep your saturations most of the time as low as necessary just to enhance it. But I'm happy with what that plant looks like. I'm happy with this lighting. And so now I can go ahead and run the Naxela Lightmapper again. And I don't have to rebake everything one at a time. It gives me a lot more control to be creative. I just hit build. And then once this is finished, I'll have some sweet light maps. Yeah, they're in there. Nice blue shadows and nice fall off across the carpet here and all that stuff. The resolution is very, very low, but once I'm happy creatively with the lighting, all I have to do is just turn it up. Instead of 1/8 the size, I'll go to half the size and I'll turn up the sampling a little bit. Let's go to medium and then bake this again. But this would take forever, so I'm not going to bake it right now because it would take too long. Um, but this is what you would do. Now, after that portion is done, just like I was saying before, all you have to do is go through these 4 materials, add in the Mozilla Light map here, which I've set to my quick favorites, but all you have to do is add Hubs, Mozilla Lightmap settings, right click on this, and then add that to your quick favorites. And then you have that in there, plug that one in there, plug that one in there. You can get rid of this node. And I will do that for each material. And there's a whole debate about whether this light map intensity should be left at 1 or set to pi. Some people say it should be set to pi. Some people say it should be left at 1. It has gone back and forth a few times. I'm going to leave it at 1. I've used both. I think it's, I mean, for me, it's quite subjective. It's whichever looks nicer is the one you should do. Um, but then if I just select all these and then I file export GLB, include selected objects, extensions, hubs, components. I'm actually going to remove vertex colors here because the Lightmapper plugin adds vertex colors sometimes. I don't know why, but so I'm just going to turn that off. And then I will export this out. And then I will go into my spoke scene here and go to my assets and upload this. And let's see. As soon as that's finished exporting, did I put it inside of here? Ah, there it is. Open this up. Ah, it didn't work. I don't know why it didn't work. Let me just make a new project. Oh, it's because they're HDR maps. Okay, that's fine. Um, Spoke doesn't support HDR maps yet. You have to import from Blender here. Open this up. You have to select the thumbnail. So I'm just going to use anything. Oh, geez. Do I have any? It has to be a PNG. Let's see. Do I have any PNGs in here? Ah, there we go. It's a glow light. Light map tutorial. And then if I publish this, I hope this works. I haven't actually gotten this far with this thing yet, this particular scene. I've done this a bunch of times with other scenes, but hopefully it doesn't come up with any unique problems that I need to solve like on the fly. Awesome. And if I open this up in Hubs, create a room, I'm crossing my fingers that this will work. Here's my nice light baked room. Of course, you can go higher resolution than this, higher sampling than this, but you got a little bit of blue on the floor. The color space is a little bit different than Blender, and so this is where a lot of fine tuning comes in, where it's like, okay, you need to actually start to use this hubs as a reference, like use this render as a reference instead of the cycles renders as a reference, because this is where it's going to ultimately end up. But you can see there's some blue on the floor and there's some orange in the light here, and the light map is going right through the plants. So higher sampling, higher resolution, and all that stuff will only improve this render. But hey, not bad for like a 25-minute demo. So that is the Naxela Lightmap plugin, Naxela Lightmapper plugin, and lighting in Hubs, in Spoke, in Blender, and baking it all out. And I appreciate you guys listening to that, and we'll take any questions that you have now. And if there are no questions, then we'll wrap up this stream, and I can help you guys in whatever other way I can help you.
It's a weird thing. There was so much that was answered as we went along the way.
Yeah, I realize it's kind of like feeding from a fire hose, but that's why these are recorded. Linda, I saw you unmute there. Did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, yeah, this was really great. This was definitely not trial by fire for me today. But no, I totally appreciate that. This it was I I got to go back and rewatch things and try it out step by step for sure. But thank you so much, Connor, for your time.
No worries. No worries. Absolutely my pleasure. Yeah, sorry if it wasn't like abundantly interactive. I just have been this is one of those step-by-step processes that I've been trying to nail down and that I know that a lot of people have been trying to nail down. So I was just like, okay, I'm just going to record this once through straight shot. It helps me a lot to have somebody in the room that I'm explaining stuff to, instead of just doing it on my own. So thank you both for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Connor.
Okay, I'm gonna stop recording.
Me too.